welcome to everybody this evening. Just a quick update. Obviously, all y'all know that Jesse's out of town this week. I might explain to you in just a moment how I wound up here. That's a fascinating story. You hear about those deals made in back rooms that are smoky. You know, it wasn't like that. It was out in the foyer out here. But he said I had to make him one promise, and that was that I wasn't going to spend the whole class on this one verse that I'm dying to get to. So I promised him I wouldn't. I am, however, going to spend about a third of it on 2 verses. So that's a good trade-off, you know. So he, I think, asked me to do this because I've done like Romans twice before and in 2 different ways. And some of the times when I sit back there with him and get really, really excited, it's something out of the book of Romans. I always called it the epistle sandwich because all the rest of them are in here somewhere. Like Romans 4 kind of overlaps Galatians 4. I mean, it's really, really nice though, because instead of those random bits and pieces, this is like the whole complete package. And you know, last week, you know, Jesse did, you know, really good, you know, introduction, kind of background information, how we came to be here. So literally tonight, we're going to start straight off just in the text. And it'll be verses 1 through 18 because I have to cheat because you really can't stop in the middle of a thought. And so I want to include that. He may have more to embellish that with next week when he's back. But that said, we're going to, I think there were 10 questions. I don't know if they got printed or emailed or distributed to anybody. They'll be here on the slide. I think they're just kind of thought questions, so I'm not aiming to put anybody on point or anything like that, but we can discuss our ways through it. Be interesting. That's what I love about this is different perspective. You're going to answer it a different way than I will, so maybe we'll both learn something. All right, so he's got verses 1 through 4 here. Paul, a bondservant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, separated to the gospel of God, which he promised before through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures, concerning his Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, who was born of the seed of David according to the flesh, and declared to be the Son of God with power, according to the Spirit of holiness, by the resurrection of the dead. So that's our first 4, and from that, we are given this question: why does Paul refer to the gospel of Christ as that which God promised before through his prophets in the Scriptures? So obviously this thing was mentioned, you know, aforetime, right? So how is the gospel a fulfillment of something that God promised before in the prophets? You have any thought on that? Or you're taking, what do you got?
Well, go back to Moses, right, where he records the first gospel hints, right, in Genesis 3. But there's that's the seed of woman that would crush the seed of Satan. Right. But yeah, you can go all the way through there and see the gospel become more and more clear with the promises to Abraham, and then, you know, prophecies of Isaiah about the glorious church, the mountain of Zion, where all the people would come from all nations, including these Gentiles, and then the gospel would go forth from there.
All right, so you gave us Moses and Isaiah. Has anybody else got a different reference or a different thought, Mr. Norm?
Yeah, I went over to the book of Ephesians, chapter 3, and the idea that the gospel, it was part of God's eternal plan, and he released that plan over time, mystery released, mystery released, mystery released, as it went on through. I just like the way he put that together in Ephesians there.
And Paul often spoke of the mystery and the revealing of it. Yes? I see your hand? Yes.
Galatians 3:8, it states, and the Scripture foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, preached the gospel to Abraham beforehand, saying, in you all the nations shall be blessed.
Okay, so saying we got Abraham, so that's another mouth that spoke to this thing. I went and grabbed Jesus and pulled him up. In Luke chapter 22:44, it says, he said to them, these are the words which I spake unto you while I was with you, that all things must be fulfilled which were written in the law of Moses and in the prophets and in the Psalms concerning me. And so he was talking about it behooved Christ to suffer, and that repentance and remission of sins should be preached in his name among all nations, beginning at Jerusalem. All those things that you just said, Jesus pulled that same summary together and told that to his disciples so that they could be looking for that when it came. I got another Norm. Okay.
Like Paul again, 1 Corinthians 13, verse 10, he shows that there was a limit, an end point to the revelation also.
Right.
And so we have the beginning points, which is at the beginning, but we also have an end point in there so we can be confident in what we are holding in our hands today. There's no more revelation after this.
Right.
Not an open-ended thing. Yes, ma'am.
Refer to it through the promises is because in the scriptures is because all they would have had would have been the Old Testament scriptures for them to look at. So that's where they would have, he's referring back to something that they should have known from.
There was an only source that they had, right?
That is correct. The next passage, I don't know, it's back in there again. It's duplicated. I wasn't sure, but I left it alone. I didn't want to mess anything up. Well, I guess it's because this comes out of that same passage. So in what sense did the resurrection of Jesus Christ declare him to be the Son of God? In other words, how is the resurrection itself a declaration of the fact that Jesus is, in fact, the Son of God? That's probably one of those self-evident things, but again, we might have different perspectives on it. Yes, ma'am?
Declared to be the Son of God with power according to the Spirit of holiness by the resurrection from the dead.
And that was the fact.
That made that the fact, right? That's what I mean, kind of self-evident. Yes, sir?
I like Revelation 1, verse 5, where it talks about Jesus being the firstborn of the dead. And so, again, it's demonstrating Jesus' power over death.
The first one to be raised from the dead,
To not die again, right? Everybody else, Lazarus and all them, they died again. Yes, sir?
I picked up John 10, verse 18, actually 17 and 18, where Jesus says, "Therefore my Father loves me because I lay down my life that I may take it again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it again. This command I have received from my Father." Obviously, only deity can raise the dead. So.
And see,
I'm going to touch something that comes up later because I had something like that written down in one of the later questions. But in the case of all the other resurrections, whether it was Elijah doing it or Jesus doing it or somebody else, there was another person involved. And in this case, a stone gets moved that a person, especially one that had died, could not possibly move, right? So it leaves no other question that there was any other source. So all power, all glory, all the honor goes to God on that one. There's just nobody else to attribute it to or to take it away from him. The second passage from which we'll draw questions, verses 5 through 7. If somebody else wants to read, you just let me know, because I think my kids get tired of my voice. Y'all might too. Through him we have received grace and apostleship for obedience to the faith among all nations for his name, among whom you also are the called of Jesus Christ. To all who be in Rome, beloved of God, called to be saints, grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. So this is obviously kind of his opening greeting. The question proposed here is, how was Paul's responsibility as an apostle of Christ consistent with that of the original apostles, and why is this important? And he gave us this reference here. Obviously, we're in Romans, so that's the verse we're citing. The Matthew 28:18 through 20, is the Great Commission, right, that he gave, to all of them. So this is a thing, obviously, Paul took personally to himself in his life also, and went to declare the gospel. But what might you have to add on this? I have a few passages. Yes, sir.
Well, just the term apostle is one who is sent. And when Jesus met Saul on the road to Damascus, he was telling him that you are a chosen vessel for me, and I am going to send you to so that in and of that definition is right there for us to use in declaring himself an apostle.
When he defended his apostleship on multiple occasions. Well, one time he said, I'm not even going to start doing that again because I've already done it. But Galatians chapter 1, that's when he says, I didn't receive it of man, I wasn't taught it, it came by the revelation of Christ, right? And he says, you've heard my story about how in the times past in the Jews' religion, right, how he ranked and the things that he did, and he persecuted the church because he was more exceedingly zealous of the traditions of his fathers. But he says there, and I've always loved this phrase, Galatians 1:15, but when it pleased God, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me by his grace to reveal his Son in me, that I might preach him among the heathen, immediately I conferred not with flesh and blood. But I think it's really, really nice that Paul dials it all the way back. The same God that separated me from my mother's womb has in fact, separated me from the tradition of my fathers, etc., and set me to the gospel. So he declares here he got it from Christ. You didn't get this from a man, and that makes him as the qualification, seeing Christ, right, being taught by Christ. I always found it interesting that Paul went into, or he didn't go immediately up to Jerusalem, but he was over in Arabia for how long? 3 years. And how long was Jesus' ministry? And didn't he have like an abundance of visions and revelations, right? I always just found that curious. I mean, you can't prove anything by that, but I just thought that's really, really interesting. Before he really, the rubber hit the road and he made it around the world and all that, he had 3 years, and you put some things together, you think, maybe he was really well informed about Jesus' life and ministry on earth, right? Just maybe. Same text, second question. So what is the meaning of the term saints? So we discussed this a lot, right? And why does Paul refer to the Roman brethren by this designation? We actually answered this question in the introduction last week, but I'll give y'all a shot at it. Again, you may have something different. Yes, sir.
It means to be set apart or sanctified for a purpose.
For a purpose. And that goes back to your Ephesians 3:11 thing, right? According to the eternal purpose. Now, Jesus had the eternal purpose, but we have a purpose within the purpose, right? Self-perpetuating purpose. Anybody else? So why would he refer to these Romans that way? What did you? Yes.
Well, the fact that they were Christians or saints, set apart, sanctified for the work of Christ. The Catholic religion wants to think of, you don't become a saint until you die, But we see in the New Testament that church members are referred to as saints many times.
When you're born.
That's correct. And obviously we spoke last week saying when you read, the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2 and all those various people that are there were people from Rome among them. They likely went back home the same way the Ethiopian eunuch went back home, And so I don't think that there's, a whole lot of room there to think that there's anything else. But Jesse covered a few of them last week, other possibilities. But that's the most practical answer, is it's just people from the day of Pentecost went back and multiplied. Yes, sir.
Interesting way that they tie the mission that the apostles were given as being set apart and the mission that all saints are given. I mean, it's their mission was to give the gospel to the saints, and the mission of the saints is set apart to do the same, basically to pass it on. So it's a direct connection all the way down.
That's that embedded perpetuity in Matthew 28, right? Teaching them to observe all things that I've commanded you, which might include teaching others. Yeah. So that way the fire doesn't just flicker out, because it could have within a generation, right? Unless it kept moving. Yes, sir.
That word called, it's way back in verse 1, where he called, my margin says he was a called apostle. And then verse 6 again, he says, among whom you also are the called of Jesus Christ. So I think that's referring back to himself. He's among them who are the called. And then he uses that same phrase again in verse 7, called saints. And that's the root word of the church, right? That it's the called out. So that concept of being the church sometimes becomes kind of institutional with our modern usage. Yeah. But we need to remember that we're just those who've been called out of the world and called into fellowship with Christ.
And the beautiful thing about Paul's writing style and the book of Romans is what you just talked about is Romans chapter 9. For Jacob have I loved and Esau have I hated, and why have you made me thus? Because the concept of election or calling should stand. He didn't pre-pick winners and losers. The question is, who answers the call? And obviously, who does the gospel call go to? The world. So everybody's called. It says, well, many are called, but few are chosen. So, the gospel goes out, and few there be that find it. And hey, even among those, some don't make it, so it's even fewer. But it is, it's neat how he layers his stuff. It's just sometimes, the paragraphs are really, 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 really long. But that is, in fact, Romans chapter 9, where he talks about this concept of election and calling. So that'll come out later on. I don't know. He said this is a 2-quarter thing, right? So that's going to probably take about, that'll be 4 or 5 weeks in, I would say, if we're, if it stays on schedule. Okay, so this begins the next passage. First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for you all. Just out the door after saying, greetings, okay? First of all, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for you all, that your faith is spoken of throughout the whole world. He mentioned that in the introduction last week. You consider no social media, no Facebook, no radio, no TV. These people have an international reputation. Now, it is the Roman Empire, okay, and news still travels. And, if you're going to get a message out, they had the roads for the job, right? But, anyway, worldwide reputation. For God is my witness, whom I serve with my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing I make mention of you always in my prayers, making request, if by some means, now at last I may find a way in the will of God to come to you. So, I guess it comes out in the questions, but he's praying about them all the time, thanking God for them, praying for a way to get to them. Many times, Paul prayed for a door of opportunity or window of opportunity or some way to get somewhere. And he had plans for Spain, right? And that's a little bit further away from home than Rome. So, he really had the ambition and the aspiration, but God knows what he's doing. And sometimes my feet would really like to get ahead of my personal capability. But as well as I do, sometimes it's a question of readiness. When Abraham's looking at this land that he's going to inherit, there's a little asterisk in there that says, but the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. So it was going to be a fullness of time. Galatians talking about, the end of the law coming, right? But the idea that in the fullness of time, right, made of a woman, born under the law. God does things in the fullness of time that doesn't line up with my little bitty vapor of a timeline, right? Important thing to remember. Even when you're wanting to do a good and great thing, but he knows, when it'll be more well received, right? He knew when to send Jonah into Nineveh and get their attention. So sometimes we just have to sit back and trust. Yes, sir.
Verse 8 up there. Again, so rich, this whole book. But here we see the pattern for prayer right there in verse 8. I thank my God through Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's the mediator.
And that's an important thing that Paul just happened to throw in there.
Yeah, but you're right, because
that puts him in his place, like Paul talks about 1 Corinthians 15, right? All things are under him, but later he's going to put down all authority and rule and power, right? Deliver up the church to the Father. So that presently is where he is. He's in that post as mediator. And I'm not sure what 11 and 12 are here on this page, but for I long to see you, because he's trying to get gift, so that you may be established. That is, that I may be encouraged together with you by the mutual faith of both you and me. There's a lot of people out there with faith, but it's not a mutual faith with ours. And my grandparents, they had a household like that, and they saw eye to eye on a great many things, but one of the hardest things to be divided with another human being on is religious things. And I've heard people say there's probably no more contentious matters on the planet Earth than, religion and politics. And I might throw economics in there, but somebody can say, well, that's just more politics, But nevertheless, that's the encouragement, is that mutual faith, that common faith, that common hope that we have one with the other. Yes, sir.
Of course, he's established his apostleship already, but clearly this is an ability that only apostles have, to impart a spiritual gift to another Christian. So he's obviously asserting that he has that ability. Clearly he did. But it also just kind of sets the tone of this letter. In the men's Bible class, we're studying 1 Corinthians. And I view those two letters as like opposites. Because obviously the church in Corinth had too many spiritual gifts. Well, not too many. The Spirit gave what it wanted to give. But they were struggling with all their spiritual gifts. And this is a church that has none.
Right.
And so that kind of gives me some basis for why these two letters are so different. Where 1 Corinthians is, here's all your problems, here's how you address them. This is very thematic and big picture, what is the gospel?
And they don't have the gifts, and they have faith with a reputation around the earth. And remember, when we were in that men's class, that's what I said. What we have now is the better thing. Having the gifts was not the better thing. And you did it again, by the way. So now you're in Romans 12. So congratulations on jumping ahead again. Because he's talking about that in Romans 12:6, having then gifts differing according to the grace that is given to us, whether prophecy or that is just speaking, okay, according to the proportion of faith, or ministry, let us wait on our ministering, or on teaching, or he that exhorts, on exhortation, or he that gives, let him do it with simplicity, or he that rules with diligence, or the one that shows mercy with cheerfulness. Yeah, those aren't the spiritual gifts, but those are all things that they did without them, and that's all the things that we can do without them, and we could have a world-renowned faith with that set of stuff. And Paul speaks in other places, like two of them that I know of, where that whole body, fitly framed together and works to the edifying of itself in love. It's like a perpetual machine that God has in mind with the church, if we can get ourselves in the right place and do what he would have us to do. So thank you, Todd, for that one. So now you're going to have to wait, 6 or 8 weeks for that one. So that's your teaser anyway. I thought it was inserting questions in here, but it's still going to more text, which I find unusual, but I guess I'll follow the sequence. Now, I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that I often planned to come to you, but was hindered until now, that I might have some fruit among you also, just as among the other Gentiles. I am a debtor to both the Greeks and the barbarians, to the wise and the unwise. So as much as in me is, I am ready to preach the gospel to you who are in Rome also. So he's saying, I've been to other Gentiles and other places, but I'm still dying to get all the way out there to y'all in Rome. So question 5, and it looks like a lot. I kind of put sort of like one-word answers on these, but if you've got your Bible open there, chapter 1 and verse 8, just for example, because it's asking, what does Paul express in relation to them in Rome in these following passages? So 1:8, I just said, well, basically the reputation of their faith. That seems to be the thing he attributes to them, right? So your turn. Verse 9, what is it that Paul is doing in his relationship with these people?
Praying for them unceasingly.
Praying for them
Unceasingly might be the key there. Verse 10.
His desire to see them.
Right.
So he wants to get with them, have that comfort of that commonality between them. And 11.
Todd, you got to take this one. Sorry.
Give them spiritual gifts.
Yes.
So that they might be established, which has got Ephesians 4 written all over it. He gave some this, that, and the other, till, right, you come to a unity of the faith, right? He gives it the time limit there. And for what? The edifying of the saints, yes, for the work of the ministry. Okay, so it's all there. The purpose and the time limit is all there in Ephesians 4. The epistle sandwich, you see. So, verse 12.
Mutual encouragement.
Yeah, that
Again, the comforted by the mutual faith, yes. Verse 13.
what's he want out of them? Yes, fruit. Desires fruit.
And so therefore he is ready to what in verse 15?
Preach the gospel.
Preach the gospel. Okay, so that gets us to 15. I might have almost accomplished my mission. Yes, sir.
I didn't realize that Paul was from the South. In Tennessee.
What's that?
With the you all there.
Oh, yeah.
You all.
You all. Yeah, well, that apostrophe came later. English had to progress from King James there. All right, so we read that.
Question 6, how did the Apostle Paul feel towards those in the world and why? So verse 14, how did he feel about them?
Obligated.
Obligated.
And all right, and there might be a reason for that. I put as a debtor, right? He's not in debt to those individuals, right? He's kind of in debt to Christ. And why would you be indebted to Christ? Because you were bought with a price, the price that he paid. So, you know, it, again, might be kind of the answer in the question there. Do you have anything different, a thought on that one?
The point I was making on the first question about the Jesus came to him and said, you are going to be my chosen vessel.
Yeah.
You know, and so the Greeks, barbarians were the folks that spoke funny to the Romans.
Yes.
Okay.
You want to know something, Norm? The Scythian people.
I'm married to one of them. And the funny thing about it was if you think about it, the Greeks had culture, right? And then you get into these other barbarian people, it dissipates from there. But when the Scythian was the lowest of the low, like they didn't have a culture or, you know, they didn't have anything going for them. They were considered, you know, the more animalistic of all people. She's laughing at me. Listen, she'll tell you the story of those Amazon women and how in order to shoot those arrows, they had to do their own mastectomies to do it, okay? You don't mess with these people. So in other words, they were even quote unquote worse than the barbarians, if you would. So it's more base kind of people. But the point is that he's ready to go and do that, though, right? The gospel's for all, right? Tamed everything, if you think about that. Anyway, so that's how he felt towards them. He was indebted to them, wanted to get the gospel to them. So 7, and we read that already. See. Okay, so now I guess we're coming up to my fun part. For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation to everyone who believes, for the Jew first and also for the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. Okay, and I think it's going to give us a question. How does the gospel of Christ serve as the power of God to salvation? This is another obvious answer, but it's also sourced out of the book of Romans in chapter 10. When we put that picture up there all the time about those like steps of salvation, and we usually like get a verse from over here and a verse from over there, I love it when it all comes from one source. And so Romans 10 gives us that, right? Because, you know, how are they going to believe except somebody's I mean, it's all there. And you say, well, baptism's not there. Oh, no, because he invokes Isaiah and says, but they have all not obeyed the gospel. Pray tell, that's more than belief because belief is there. So what is obedience to the gospel? Okay, so it's all right there in Romans 10, but that is also going to be 7 or 8 weeks down the road. So I'm not going to touch that one. Look, we're at 7:30, so I'm trying to get to that 1/3, and I promise you we're going to have a fantastic conversation, okay? I promise. So again, we read that. So we're trying to get, I'm not sure. Well, that's the thing. Yes, sir. There it is. Question 7.
The idea is, what does it take to please God? That's the meaning of righteousness, is doing the right thing for the right reason.
Right.
So, and this is about, the gospel is about how to please God. He's revealing what it takes to please Him. And He lays it out for us, and He asks us to obey.
So without the gospel that declares the resurrection of the Christ who died for the sins of all people, that they could be reconciled to God, and the Jew and the Greek could come together and be one fold, right? That beauty of that mystery that you were talking about earlier, that's it. So that's how the gospel is the power of God. It's going to accomplish that eternal plan, and that's how He chose to do it through His Son. Does anybody else have a statement they want to make on this one? Yes, ma'am.
News that God sent His Son to earth to die for the sins of man. God grants salvation through His Son.
Right. Exactly it.
Okay. Let me see, let me hit my button here. That's a theme of the epistle, which I'm going to talk to you about myself. I'm not discounting any of that. But I have always, let's do this one. In what sense, because this is it, is the righteousness of God revealed in the gospel? So righteousness is like, the doing of that which is right. It's kind of like what Norm said a minute ago. So how is God's right doing revealed in the gospel? What did God accomplish? We kind of just said it. He reconciled all men to himself. That's what he did. That was the mystery. He did it through the blood of Christ. So in what sense is his righteousness made evident in the fact that his Son died for all men? I'm going to point you to Romans 8.
Oh, what did you do? Were you pointing at something?
I heard you about to speak.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say.
You don't be scared to jump in front of me. It's okay.
It's okay. I was just gonna say that part of it is a fulfillment of prophecy, that righteousness of God, because it was sent to the Jews first, and that was the foreshadowing of what he was about to accomplish in the New Testament. And so some of that is, just he had this plan from the beginning, and he gave it to his people, the Jews, first, and it was revealed way back then, and so much, like I said, foreshadowing, and now we have that.
So you're talking about the plan that was from the beginning, and he mentioned that eternal purpose, okay? So like in a nutshell, 1 John 3:8 says, "For this purpose was the Son of God manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil." Why did he come? Because of that serpent in the Garden of Eden that you mentioned earlier. Likened to that is Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14, which, why does it slip my mind when I need it? But the point is again, to destroy him that had the power of death and deliver them who were all their lifetime subject to bondage. That would be those subject to the bondage of sin. So it's kind of a twofold purpose. It's one-fold purpose, but there's two things that are accomplished in it. And the first thing is that the works of the devil are destroyed, and the second one is that all the men are reconciled, or, he led captivity captive and gave gifts unto men. That's where you're touching that eternal purpose that you're talking about. Finger. Yes, ma'am.
I stated that it's revealed in the gospel through faith.
Right.
You have to have faith once you have heard it, read it, or for whatever reason. If you don't have faith in that, then
Right.
you're not anywhere.
See, you're on, and you're not any chapters ahead. You're right here where we're supposed to be. It is the faith question, and this text, okay, this particular verse, this Romans 1:17. I had jumped over to Romans 8. Let me give you that real quick. When I told you that my answer for this came out of Romans 8, it's in verses 18 through 23. But I would show you one thing. Paul's talking about, everybody in the whole creation, is groaning, waiting and groaning, right? Romans 8:20 says, "For the creature," that would be like, me and you, we're the ones waiting for this reconciliation, okay, "was made subject to vanity, not willingly, but by reason of him who had subjected the same in hope." This is the way I have always understood this verse, because you'll get into other places where it talks about we were made lower than the angels, and that Jesus then was made lower than the angels and crowned with glory and honor and all this stuff, okay? Here's the point that I see here. This physical body is subject to vanity, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life, okay? Now, God made us that way, and we're going to be back to that "why have you made me thus" argument that's a chapter away from this, okay? So the idea is that God made us subject to vanity, but simultaneously made us subject to hope. That is, if you can imagine yourself like Joseph thrown down in the pit by your brothers, and you can't get out of the pit. If being in this fleshly body, subject to vanity, is in the pit, God gave us the little rope ladder to come out. He's calling us out. We take hold of the ladder and we come out. So that's the wisdom of God. He made us with a weakness, as it were, and we acted on that weakness, and therefore, the fall of man, and therefore the plan of redemption. It's a lot bigger than what I wanted to do tonight, but it still connects to the book of Romans, so maybe we can bring that out later. Yes, sir?
The faith part was always the fascinating part for me. Because when you look at the Bible, it's a series of stories.
Mhm.
It's a series of stories of people of faith, the successful ones, successful people of faith that passed the information about what it takes to be righteous and unrighteous
Right.
along from person to person to person. And isn't that interesting that is the plan ultimately that God gave to us, is to teach teachers to teach teachers to teach.
So you're using that
Faith word like her, okay? Y'all are not alone in this, by the way. So there's the actual statement, though, okay? The righteousness of God is revealed, like you said, from faith to faith. As it is written, the just shall live by faith. So that's our last question here. What does that statement mean? And I'm going to put the remote control down because I talk with my hands. I used to sing a song out of a songbook called Living by Faith. And I always had the picture that that's what it means. A righteous person, a just person is going to live out their life day to day according to their faith. Now, I'm not setting any trap for you. I'm just asking you, is that your conception of this statement or do you have a different one? Yes, sir.
Going again, the just shall live by faith. The just are those who, in fact, are being righteous because they're following God's word.
Mm-hmm.
And the faith part of it is the idea that if you believe God and you believe in His word, then you do something about it.
Okay.
And these people, these men after man after man, teach generations.
But Martin Luther took this and listen, we owe him a debt of gratitude. He really did pave the way for truth to make its way to the hands of the people. And he was taken out kind of prematurely, okay, and maybe had he lived longer and stuff. But yes, he had this idea, if you will. He said, I had been taught to understand philosophically regarding the formal or active righteousness, as they call it. And he goes on, and I only want one other sentence from him. But he says, and this is the meaning, he says, of this right here. The righteousness of God is revealed by the gospel, namely the passive righteousness with which the merciful God justifies us by faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. Where's the verse come from? Habakkuk chapter 2. I want y'all to turn over there for a minute. And while you're turning there, I'm going to ask you a question. What subject is Habakkuk covering? What's going to happen? Does anybody remember?
What's the
punishment coming from Babylon?
Okay.
Babylonian punishment. All right, y'all going to love this, I promise, okay? So Habakkuk at the beginning of the book issues this little complaint. He's like asking God, why is it that your people are supposed to just be, kind of a light into the world and they're doing all this evil and, you haven't set them straight yet. So Habakkuk 2:2, and the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain upon tables, that he may run that reads it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry. Behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith. I'm going to stop right there. So what you're telling me is this prophet is finding out that the Babylonians are going to come and give some correction to the Israelites, right? That's what's going to happen. Okay. So you could flip back to chapter 1 and verse 6 real quick, because it does say that. For lo, I raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation. So that's no mistake in understanding that or making that application. So Habakkuk's told to do a few things. First thing, write it plain, like clear and simple. Okay? You ever seen signs? You just stop. Isn't that nice? There's no footnotes underneath stop. In this case, you stop. In this case, if you're in Texas, you do a rolling stop. I mean, it's just stop. Write it clear up on the tables. Why? It's in the verse. Why? Why is he going to write it clear up on the tables, the tablets? Why is he going to do that? So the one who reads it may run. Okay, so the person who obeys the word that comes from the prophet is going to do what? He's going to run. Is that active or passive? So let me ask you a question. Some people decided they're going to do that. They're going to run when they see the Chaldeans coming. Other people just laughing. You stupid. God loves us. He's going to take care of us. They're going to stay there. Let me ask you question number 2. Babylonians march in. You think everybody stayed sitting down, or you think people ran? Who ran by faith? The people that heeded the prophet, or the people that heeded when the Chaldeans showed up at the front door? So that's how faith becomes action for deliverance from God through His prophets. That has been abused for centuries, and it needs to stop, I don't know, today, okay? So write it plain that they can read it. He that remembers and watches will run and will live. How in the world does that connect to the gospel? Because I've only got 4 minutes left. So go back to your Romans chapter 1. This is the verse that I'm stealing, and if I have to serve time for it, I'll do that, because it connects it together. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. So here's the point. The gospel is coming to save you not from an invading army. If you heed the message of the prophet, you live to see another day. That's what it means. It don't mean live your daily life by faith. It means you live to see another day. In this case, in the final picture, when the elements burn with a fervent heat, right? And judgment day, right? There's nowhere you can run. There's nowhere you can run. So you got to have the gospel. Listen, I meant to insert this in there because Jesus did the exact same thing that Habakkuk did in Matthew 24, talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. And he says, when you see it, do what? Do what? Norm, I usually hear you. Say it again. Okay, do something if you want to live. So that's the point. From the very beginning of the book, laying down the foundation of the gospel, it's that. If you would like to live to see the eternal day, you better be listening to the message of the prophet. Okay? I'm sorry, that stuff works me up. Go ahead.
No, it's okay to go along with that. Obviously, in Philippians 2, it tells us that every knee will bow. So it's a matter of when.
Yeah. And I think that there was one more part to that question. I put Romans 4, jumping a little bit ahead, 21 and 22 here. Because, again, this answers the faith works argument. Because, Luther made a war against the book of James. In early centuries, people didn't like the book of James because James says, no, faith by works. Oh, no. And none of that action stuff going on here. Read the reconciliation of the entire faith and works arguments out of the mouth of Paul, who just wrote chapter 1. Talking about Abraham and being fully persuaded that what he had promised he was also able to perform, therefore it was imputed to him for righteousness. Okay? Why would you get up and run if you thought the Chaldeans were coming? Is God fully able to perform that discipline upon Israel? So now you've got every prophet that ever warned Israel about impending destruction or punishment in that same box. So the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness, from which there is no escape on planet Earth. And if you would like to see another day, that is the eternal day, you're going to have to accept the gospel, okay? But 4:21 and 4:22 is about the smallest, most succinct way that Paul can reconcile the faith and works argument together. He was fully persuaded that what God promised he was able to perform. So persuasion happens in your head. Maybe that is passive. I don't think so, but maybe it is. But what action you take depends on what you are told to do. If you're told to get up and run, you get up and run. If you're told to not do this, you don't do that. But whatever the prophet says. So in our case, what did Jesus say? He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. From what? The wrath of God to come. Norm.
The head part that you make, the point there is a good one, because all the decisions are made in the mind of man. That's where the decision, and it's that decision that drives the action. Right. And so if you have to have faith to be able to really believe that that this is the right decision to make, because it's the righteousness of God that's being proved.
And on that note, Abraham took action to have a son, and it was the wrong action. And, God later proved that. And his body wasn't dead, or Sarah's womb wasn't dead. So anyway, guys, I hadn't had coffee in several hours, so I want you to know it wasn't the coffee. But I've spent a lot of my life trying to battle these profound and fundamental abuses of Scripture, and that's just one of them. And so I would just point you to Romans 4, 21 and 22 to kind of reconcile that discussion. Thank y'all.